she's done so much great work. Judith Browne Dianis is someone who is the executive director of the Advancement Project. She has worked with dealing with restoring the voting rights to felons who have been disenfranchised. She has done a lot of work on voting rights, especially with the strict voter ID laws that have been passed as a result of the evisceration of Section 4 by the US Supreme Court in 2013. The Advancement Project is an organization at advancementproject.org that handles a number of different issues. Education, addresses issues around the school to prison pipeline, and so many other things that a great organization does, like the Advancement Project, and a great leader of that organization, Judith Browne Dianis. Welcome to the Politicrat podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
I just wanted to first of all talk about where we stand now with voting, and obviously a lot of people understand that there has been an ongoing attack on voting in this country. We've seen it from the early 1900s to 1965, and Amelia Boynton and John Lewis, and all of these things that have happened. Civil rights workers being killed, and then we get to 2013. With the Shelby versus Holder decision in the US Supreme Court that got rid of Section 4 of preclearance. And now we get to today and what's happened since, because we had a lot of Black voters turn out, brown voters turn out. There was still lots of voter suppression. But we get to Wayne County. I wanted you to talk a little bit about where we are with voting, particularly what happened in Wayne County yesterday. Your reaction to that, and then perhaps we can have a little bit broader discussion.
Sure. So Wayne County, where Detroit is, as the way the process works is that we vote, and then the vote gets certified by a local canvassing board. And that vote is then certified, and then it goes to the state, and usually then the state seats their electors who actually elect the president. So what happened was that the electors deadlocked. I think it was 2-2, 2 Republicans against 2 Democrats, and they didn't want, that meant that they couldn't certify the vote. And the Republicans, I guess at the time, were saying, well, there are some irregularities, and so we can't approve certification of the vote in Wayne County, Detroit, where Black folks turned out in record numbers and voted overwhelmingly for Biden. And so it left this moment where, you know, there was this question about if the vote in Detroit is not certified, then what happens to the vote in the state of Michigan? And so, so that was freaking people out for a little while. Until apparently a lot of organizing happened, a lot of folks on the ground showing up and showing out and saying, no, you got to certify this vote. And it's funny, I was actually watching CNN last night, and the Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, was on CNN talking about this. And this was all playing out in real time yesterday. And literally while she was on CNN, they had changed the vote and certified the vote. So the canvassers changed their vote. So, so you know, this, I mean, I think what this boils down to is that there are a large swath of Republicans who do not want to recognize that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris won. And they don't want to certify the vote, and they just are being recalcitrant, and they are, some of them are buying into the Trump BS about voter fraud and irregularities. And some of them are not, but they're just saying they are, right? Because this is a way to stop the certification. And I think that the thing that keeps coming up is like these maneuvers to try and manipulate our democracy in order to maintain power. And that's what this is about, is maintaining power. And so this was a last stitch effort, I guess, to try and upset the apple cart in Detroit of all places. And we need to understand that the reason this would come up in Detroit is because there's this continuing narrative around Black and brown voters, particularly Black voters, being the ones who are committing fraud, right? Like, which fits into the whole criminalization of Black bodies in this country, right? It's like we are the continuous suspects for white America, and that being suspect is really, so it's not just like crimes, but it's also around voting, and it's all fictitious, it's all baseless, it's all just white supremacy playing itself out.
And one thing that I would really like to add to what you've said is that one of the immediate reactions I had to yesterday was this re-institutionalizing of the Three-Fifths Principle that once was in the Constitution years and years ago, that these Black voices don't count for as much or don't count at all,
Right.
in a voting sense. And yet I had heard, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Judith, that there were neighboring counties that were predominantly white that apparently had a few more few more irregularities in this election. I'm not sure if it was this one or the last one, but I had heard someone on CNN or another network say this, that there were neighboring predominantly white counties with more irregularities, yet there was no issue about certifying them. There was no hesitation to certify them. So I don't know if you had known about this.
Yeah, I don't know about it. I mean, the irregularities are, I mean, I don't buy into the whole irregularity, because I think there are always little things that are gonna happen, right, in an election. There are things that are human error. There are, there's just things like that that I'm the first one to call out voter suppression. Now, let's get that straight, right? Like, if there's like serious, like systemic irregularities, like that's my job, is to call that out. And even if it impacted white people, I'd call it out, because what I want is a functioning democracy, so that all voices are heard. And so I've not heard that, but the thing is that even if I put that aside, the bottom line is that the Trump campaign continues to go after particular areas of our country, in terms of calling out making these baseless claims around voter fraud. And those are places where Black people are and where Black people turned out, right? It's Atlanta, it is Milwaukee, it is Detroit, it is Philadelphia, right? It's no coincidence that those are the places that they keep going after, right? And it is all about being able to keep in front of their base, their radical red meat racist base, the idea that Black people stole something, and this time it was an election, and it's all false. There's no, as much red meat as they want, there's no beef there whatsoever, because they keep going into court and they don't got nothing. I mean, I'm just shocked that they can keep going into court with these baseless claims, because in my world, if Black lawyers show up with baseless claims, they're getting what we call Rule 11, which is sanctions from a court, because you came to court with some BS, and you had no factual basis for bringing your claims. And when you get Rule 11, you can lose your bar license. So these white folks, these white lawyers are filing all this crap across the country and getting away with it, right? And because no one's gonna, and we know as lawyers that, like, when you look at Rule 11 sanctions, they are disproportionately brought against Black lawyers. And so these people, including Giuliani, right, go and file all these cases that have no evidence.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up something I was just going to add, because as an attorney myself, that is the thing that was screaming in my head. Rule 11, where are the sanctions? Come
Mhm.
on, these people are bringing these frivolous lawsuits to the bar. That I'm sorry,
Right,
you would be slapped down real hard if you
right,
did, especially if us, like you said, as Black attorneys,
right,
forget it. And,
right.
and no one's bringing up that conversation, except, and obviously in the Black press it's happening, or in some parts of the Black press, but generally speaking, you're not getting on MSNBC. You have all these legal analysts, and I know you've been on a lot of these networks, but you have all these legal analysts, and somehow none of them think to talk about that
Mhm.
aspect of this too, which is
It's
awfully
funny because
corrosive.
I mentioned I was on Chris Hayes recently, and Chris is a lawyer, so I mentioned it to him. I was like, this is Rule 11 all day. I don't understand, but they don't live in that world where they have to worry about being punished, right? Whereas Black lawyers do.
Right, right. Um, One other thing about this before I ask you more about the kind of work that you do and the advancement project, about this voting, though, this has been a 60-year plus attack on the Black voter by, I mean, the Dixiecrats, but also the Republicans. A
Mhm.
60-year history here in this country of doing this. I mean, this certainly did not, and I'm not saying that you said this, you didn't, but this certainly did not. I mean, this is for the benefit of people listening or watching. This did not begin with Donald Trump. This attack on Black voters has gone on for such a long time. And there's always been this institutional system pushback against the efforts that Black people make by, sacrificing their bodies, doing all these things to get to the right to be enfranchised. And there's this institutional pushback, this systemic pushback, whether it's something
Mhm.
like Wayne County, whether it's the kinds of voting literacy tests that we saw back in the 60s about jelly beans, how many jelly beans there are in a
Mhm.
jar.
Mhm.
And I'm just thinking that this is not going to be the end of this.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see more of this in the future, where counties do this kind of nonsense, or where they find some other mechanism after the fact to hinder Black people from
Mhm.
exercising their franchise.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when the United States was set up, right, as a foundational matter, voting was limited and restricted to white men who owned property. And so this is, since the founding of this country, this has been the, Achilles heel, I guess they call it. I shouldn't use these kind of like, but it's been the problem. And it is again about power and money, and control, and like you said, we start off with that. We start off with 3/5, right? And 3/5 was a compromise that was around power, right? Around political power, and making sure that the South had some semblance of power for the number of enslaved people that were in those states to help them with the electoral college, et cetera. And then you move through, we have disenfranchisement laws around people with felony convictions because, solely because that was the post-Reconstruction era way of making sure that newly freed Black folks could not participate, right, by criminalizing them and saying, we criminalized you and now you can't vote. Then we have all of the Jim Crow laws that, it is the bubbles in the bar of soap, or the number of jelly beans, or the literacy test, as you said, or the grandfather clauses, et cetera. And we get the Civil Rights Act of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. But that didn't stop discrimination in voting, right? I mean, it just gave us like a tool as lawyers to use to try and fight it. And so now we are in an era where we're still enforcing what is left of that law. And, the playbook just changes a chapter, right? The playbook of voter suppression. So next chapter, right? The chapter after Obama was elected and there was white lash around his election was a chapter on voter ID. And voter ID became the tool of choice that was really targeted at Black and brown voters and young voters and our elders, right, who may not have had access to very restrictive voter ID. It wasn't just any old ID. It was like, did you have your name, your address, current address, your signature, and a photo on the ID. And so it wasn't as simple as, oh, everybody's got ID. No, not this ID. And so then it was voter ID. And it's been purging, and it's now, what we're going to see after this election is going to be the attacks on vote by mail, because initially that was like Republicans were using that. And, and they loved it, but then their boy Trump was like, oh no, that's fraudulent, we can't use it. So then they didn't use it and we used it. And so now that we used it, they're, no, we're not gonna, we gotta put an end to that, right? And that's actually fraudulent now that that those other people have been using it. And so, this is the push and pull that is about the changing demographics of America. Because the more that we see the browning of America, the more we're going to see attempts to restrict our ability to tap into our political power. And so, no, it is not going to be over. Even if the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act gets passed by Congress, although it's sitting there because Mitch McConnell cares more about getting judges on the bench, Republican conservative judges who are unqualified on the bench. He cares more about that than voting rights and COVID. Even if we get that passed, we're still going to be fighting the fight. And that's because, the people who have power want to keep power, right?
Right.
And it's not that they're scared, right? Like, I hate when people say, oh, they're scared of what. They ain't scared. They just know that they want to benefit from the idea of power, and it's like power to them is a limited thing, right? And so you can't share it with a bunch of people, and if you share it with somebody, that means you lose something to them, and so they don't want to share it. And so that's what this is about. And the browning of America is like, to them, like, like the last stand of Custer, or like, it's like, we gotta, we really have to make sure that we hold on to this. It's the last stand of white supremacy, because they know if the majority is able to tap power, white supremacy comes down, just like all those monuments have been coming down. The handwriting's on the wall for them. And so when the handwriting's on the wall, you better look and be like, oh, we got to figure out a new plan. So a new chapter of voter suppression gets written.
Yeah, this is like, and when people like Lindsey Graham say, well, we've got to review these vote by mail things because a Republican will never be elected again. He's talking about a white supremacy will be over with. That's really what he's saying. And the idea that he would go to the Secretary of State of Georgia, who himself, by the way, has unclean hands, and that doesn't get talked about.
Right.
Brad Raffensperger, there's a whole nother story altogether, right? He's got unclean hands with Stacey Abrams and the purging and all of that. And there was a lawsuit this year or last year that
be the last person to be cooking the books for a Democrat. Come on.
Right.
That is not happening in the state of Georgia. No. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's even the thought of them, like, but and then for Senator Lindsey Graham to be allegedly pushing on him, is just, I mean, that's just like old boy voter suppression stuff. Like, we're just gonna come for you. Yeah, I mean, it's, this is a ongoing fight that we will have, and I think that what has happened is our turnout and our numbers have shifted the conversation for them. And so it will be like, what's the next thing that they can do? And we're getting ready to go into redistricting cycle, and so that too, where redistricting is the tool by which we divide political power in this country by neighborhood, by geography. And so that for them is they want to be in control of that process so they can, again, not only, elect the people that they want, but also make sure that they maintain the power for, when you draw redistricting lines, it's really 10 to 20 years worth of power you're talking about.
Wow. And then this gerrymandering as well, we've seen, and stuff that happens in Wisconsin where, Democrats are elected all the time, but yet the Republicans still hold on to power based on the way they've
Yeah.
drawn districts, or the gerrymandering that happens. And it's not just Wisconsin, these Republican state legislators in these states where there's large Black populations too in these particular centers and metro areas. And the state level stuff is really critical, and people need to keep their eye on that. We've got two big Senate races coming up in Georgia, January 5th. A reminder for listeners, viewers, that December 7th is the deadline in Georgia, if you're in Georgia, to register to vote for those critical two Senate races. Very important. But I did want to ask you about the work at the Advancement Project that you do, because of course there's so many different dimensions to the organization. And again, the website is advancementproject.org. So many different things that your organization does. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things that it does? I mean, there's education, there's all kinds of things. Can you talk a bit about that, please?
Sure. So Advancement Project first is a national racial justice organization that works to support grassroots organizations in building power to end structural racism and white supremacy. And so at the heart of our work is building power. And so we support grassroots groups on a number of issues, voting rights being one, the restoration of voting rights for people with felony convictions. We have an education program that is pretty well known for our work around ending the school to prison pipeline. And we now have a campaign for police-free schools. So we support mostly young people, youth organizers across the country. And when I say young people, I'm talking about like high school students, not like 30-year-olds, right? So we support them in advocacy and pushing on their school districts to do the right thing, to take police out of schools. And the reason that we're doing that is because police don't belong in schools. You can't build a nurturing environment with police who you don't trust. If we have learned anything in the past year since the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, Rayshard Brooks, and others, it's that our community has a distrust of the police that is rightfully a distrust, right? And so we've been working for a number of years with groups to get police out of schools, to use that money so that for things like counselors and for all the other resources, restorative justice programs, so that young people can feel loved and nurtured in a school building, not criminalized, right? And it's not just that, but also young people are getting assaulted by the police in schools, right? Because the same cops that we meet in the streets are the cops who are in our hallways. And so we've been working with groups to also just reimagine what safety looks like in a school building. And you can see that, there are a lot of kids who go to school in white communities who don't have police in their schools, don't need them, right? And that's actually where the mass shootings happen. So there's something to think about there. So we work on that. We also work on immigrant justice issues, and specifically on the criminalization of our undocumented neighbors, and looking at things like the detention centers and the conditions of detention centers. And then our justice project is where our criminal justice and policing work is. So we currently, for example, have been trying to get some places to release people who are in jail due to COVID. So we've been challenging cash bail because people should not be held in jail. This is pre-trial, held in jail because they can't afford bail, right? If you're wealthy, you pay it, you walk out. If you can't afford it, too bad, you're behind bars. And that is not what we should be doing to people, because there's real consequences for staying in jail, right? Like you could be evicted, you lose your job, you can lose your children. And so, so we have been fighting cash bail, but along the way, we've also been working on, because of COVID, the people who are in jail, we're seeing that pandemic in the jails. And so you can't socially distance in a jail cell. And they're not known to be sanitary environments, nor do you get adequate health care in a jail. So we've filed a number of cases. We have, most of us are lawyers at Advanced Project, but we filed a number of cases, 5 lawsuits around COVID in jails. And then we also are working on policing issues and supporting grassroots organizations that are looking to reimagine how safety is done in their communities, including those who are calling for defunding the police, and building up like a support for protesters who are being beaten in the streets for protesting police violence, right? And so, so that's our work, and it really is about how do we support and but support local communities in building power so that they can hold the systems accountable, hold their elected officials accountable, hold their school boards, whether it's their school board or their prosecutor or their sheriff, accountable for doing what those communities want.
Oh, wow. I mean, that is just such great work that you do, and I'm really glad that that you do it, and I know that there are other organizations out there, but yours is one of the premier organizations that's been involved in this particular way for some time now. And I by the way, I hope the new incoming administration talks to you. It talks to you and your organization if they haven't already. I would hope that they would, because I think say that again. I didn't hear you.
I said, we'll see. We'll see.
I really, because it would be a great place to start. Anything else that you wanted to say regarding your organization, or about what you think voters need to do? Obviously, to stay vigilant is one of them, but is there anything, and of course, and also any social media that you wanted to give out in these last few moments?
Sure. So, I mean, a few things. One is beyondadvancementproject.org, which is our main website. We also have a website called wecametolearn.com. And on We Came to Learn, it's about the school police issues. And so we have a report there. We produce a lot of things to help communities like start their own work. So we have like an action kit where you can like start to do work around police and schools. On that website, we also have a map of where the school-based assaults have happened, police violence in schools. And so people should check that out. Also, I think really what's important, right, is we're on the other side of an election. And what we need to know is that our power doesn't begin and end on election day. And that we have to continue to engage with the people that we elected. Sending them a little email every once in a while to like be like, oh, I agree with that, or I don't agree with that, is really important, because they don't get a lot of mail. And especially because if you're living in a place where everybody voted Democrat or everybody voted Republican, like people just get complacent with like, well, we voted them in, so they know what they're doing. No, they don't know. So we have to continue to push them. So like even with the Biden-Harris administration, and like your question about, I hope they reach out to you. Well, maybe they will. But guess what? Even if they don't, they're gonna know who we are. That's for sure. I mean, they do know who we are, but like we're not gonna sit back and be like, oh, they know what they're doing, and we're really excited to have them there. No, we've got to protest them too, because they're not gonna get everything right. And so that's important, is that people need to continue to engage, because election day does not end our power.
Judith Browne Dianis, the racial justice attorney and the executive director of the Advancement Project, I really do thank you for your time. So valuable. I really appreciate you, respect you and your work. Thank you so much for being here on the Politicrat podcast today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.